This is Scott Mcdonald. I'm so glad to be here with you on our podcast. There are some events in the news that come up, and occasionally I'll talk about those. Today is such a day. We also are going to make sure that you get notification of these meetings. Remember, we record these and put them onto Dr. Demographics each week. So I'd like to have you take a look at this week's in particular, because you might want to share it with your friends and neighbors. Here's the thing. There are some interesting developments that are affecting demographics and are likely to affect demographics in the future. So when you're trying to figure out where's the best place to put a practice, where should I move to live, where are the places that are the low-hanging fruit, some of those topics are going to come up. Now, every other week, maybe every 2 or 3 weeks, I will list the locations of places that I'm seeing a particular potential or promise. And I'll do that as well. I try not to do the same states or the same counties. I'm trying to mix that up just a little bit. But at the same time, I'm trying to make sure we're talking about the issues that you most need to know, as they are going to affect the long term in the United States in where to put practices and where you ought to live. Such a thing happened this week. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I want to talk again about California. Now, you may say, really, do I need to know one more thing about California? Is that really important? Because I'm not considering going to California. See, the trends that we're talking about are going to be important in various places throughout the United States, because there's a trend that has been implemented that I think you ought to know about. One of those trends is represented in something that's going on in California. The state, or they call it SB 9, and Gavin Newsom, the day after he survived his recall election, decided, doggone it, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to change property values. I'm going to change locations. I'm going to shift demographics. And here's what I'm going to do. Essentially, it is shifting private property and the demographics in various places. And California is kind of leading the way. It is, after all, the nation's most populous state. But there are other states that are likely to implement this same thing, which we're calling SB 9. And you need to know what it means. So here's what happened. Now, remember, this is the day after Newsom survived the recall. And I don't know why he thought he's impervious to political will and property. Values are going to be changed. And here's how. Zoning for single-family dwellings is going to be curtailed or changed dramatically. Everybody says California doesn't have any property that can be developed. It's way too expensive to build homes. And by the way, office buildings. People are not following what is logical and what the city planners and politicians want to have happen. So what he's doing is, through mandate, not through legislation, he's changing the zoning of single-family dwellings. Here is how. Apartments are to be allowed to be built in every residential neighborhood in California. So let's say you look up and down your block and you say, oh, we've got a lot of beautiful homes, nice front yards, big garages and whatever. Well, if somebody decides they want to build an apartment building in that single family resident area, a place that the HOA has decided, no, you can't do that, now you can. You can also subdivide homes so that, well, as I'll explain, it will change the nature of population density and property values. HOAs will no longer have the power to regulate the types of dwellings in their neighborhoods. Now, currently, if you have a homeowners association, they can say, no, the property has to be of a certain size. You have to have a certain setback from the street. You've got to maintain your property to a certain standard. But effectively, what he's doing is saying the housing authorities, the private property defenders, which are really nonprofit corporations, a special kind, don't really have the power to regulate anything, even though previously you may have agreed when you bought your home that you would have to hold to these HOA standards. Well, he wants to do away with that. Homes may be able to be subdivided into mini dwellings. So let's just say you have a great big home. You don't have to tear the house down, but you can do internal structures so that more people can come into that home. Let's say you're turning a great big home into 4 apartments. Now, they don't necessarily have to have their own separate entrance. They don't have to have separate garages. You can make it so that 4 homes can exist, or 4 apartments in the space of a single home. Now, there are certain very good reasons why he is encouraging this and why Californians are thinking this is a great idea. Single family dwelling units, and that's what we in demographic circles call SFDU, will only need a 1-car driveway. Now, they're doing that because they really, really want to encourage mass transit. They want people to use the buses and trains. And therefore, it sets up an imperative to say proximity to public transportation is a very, very good thing. They are also making certain changes to allow buses and train lines to go into residential areas, which before have been restricted. So we're looking for a proliferation of that. And after all, if you're a friend of the earth, that's what you want. The minimum sizes on residential lots is going to be changed or severely restricted. So in the backyard, you may have to have a setback of 100 feet up to the property line or the fence. Now, they're doing this by mandate. They're not doing it by legislation, and it will go into every city and every neighborhood in California. I will back up and say there are going to be a lot of lawsuits about this because you're affecting people's property values, and that gets into the area of a taking. Can you make people have to do things even though it's going to hurt their investment in their homes? But nevertheless, that's what they're trying to suggest. I don't think it's going to happen, but that is what they're suggesting. Now, the commercial and retail zoning regulations may also be changed radically. So at this time, your neighborhood, which is primarily residential, doesn't have office buildings, but they can say you can convert some of the property that is right now in a single family home into a commercial or retail space. That is going to be, it remains to be seen if that can be done, but that is what a lot of the advocates are saying. We need to really liberate property use in California and make sure that it's all good. Voting districts are going to be easier to administer if we do this. So ultimately, this reduces, it increases the population density in all of these homes. It makes it so that people will have far more population per neighborhood and even per residence than we currently have. That means voting districts can be severely impacted. Now, California can select its own voting districts, but there are regulations that restrict that. We'll have to see what happens. But it would mean more people living in a smaller space, and that is, as far as city planners are concerned and politicians, is a great thing. Policing will be more efficient and therefore reduce crime, in theory, because with more people living in a smaller space, it means that you don't need to have as many police officers to patrol an area. The same thing is true with fire districts, firehouses. It also will impact other public services. So as you cram more people together, it's a more efficient use, as far as the idea is concerned, to property. I think this is a much more invasive thing than what we've seen so far, but let's go to the explanation. There is, by their explanation, a greater sense of community and neighborhood. Now, progressives have always believed that suburbs separate people. With less population density, there's not as much of a neighborly feel. When you cram people together, that makes more of a community and a neighborhood. And that's really, really a good thing sociologically. The problem, of course, is it's not necessarily proven based upon demographics, actual history, that it makes more of a community or a neighborhood, but that's what they're saying. Teachers, for example, will be able to live much closer to schools because with more people crammed into a location, you don't have to have a long commute to get to your school. So that's one more excuse why it's a really, really good idea. You probably already know that in San Jose, the properties became so expensive that teachers had to pay a premium to drive an hour to get to their schools, or they had to give a property voucher so that people could afford to live in an apartment as a teacher or as a policeman that is close to the area that they patrol and where they work. That's the theory. Infrastructure will be more rationally planned and constructed when you have a much more dense population. And that's one of the things that Gavin Newsom and his allies says really needs to be done. More efficient use of, infrastructure expenses. Now, there is a belief that high-rise apartments are by far a better use of property. You have more people living in a smaller space. It's more energy efficient. It is just a better use of land. Now, I'm going to say rather bluntly, that's not true. There have been lots of studies that demographers have done that showed these high rises are not a better use of space, and that people tend to suffer much more. But more importantly, people don't want to live on top of each other. They don't want to have higher density housing. In fact, in a post-pandemic world, people have manifestly said, I don't want to do this. I want to get out of this little cracker box. Now, I'm going to give you some things, what smart people are saying. Pew Research reports that 60% of people are against this Gavin Newsom plan. 39% of people like it. But as we look at the trends where it's going, as people are instructed or told about it, the people who dislike it have gone up by about 8%. People who are for it have dropped 7%. So in other words, it doesn't appear to be popular. Where it's been tried, basically, voters dislike it. But city planners love it. It makes it much easier for them to administer these programs. The likely result is that people are going to vote with their feet. If you think people are quickly getting out of California now, well, if this is actually implemented and proves legal, we may actually see it double or triple. Another result is prices are going to rise quickly for available spaces. Now, remember, if a property costs $400,000 for a single family dwelling, you can then divide it into 4 spaces, and each of those spaces may be $150,000 to $200,000. So the property itself is going to become far more valuable for the owners of the property who are renting, leasing, or selling it. That's something they say, but I think what's actually going to happen is when there are spaces available to construct homes or to improve properties, the prices are going to increase dramatically when that happens. There are going to be legal battles till the cows come home. Trust me, there are enough lawyers in California that they're going to have a heyday doing this. Now, a likely result is places without these regulations are going to grow exponentially. So if you don't have this, or let's say you're in a community where you're near but not in one of these places where these regulations occur, it looks like they're going to have more and more people who will want to build there. I also am predicting crime is going to go up. Population density is always increased whenever there is, crime is increased when population density goes up. Prices are going to increase rapidly when alternatives are present. Now, they can say all of California is going to be affected by it, but the reality of it is that isn't going to happen. It's going to happen some places and not in others. And in those places where there are alternatives to this, I think prices of properties are going to go up. And that is not only for residential areas, but it's also true of commercial and medical properties. Now, a couple of predictions. It's going to be tried in those areas that are most progressive. I didn't say liberal. I'm saying where there are progressive attitudes, they're going to love it. San Francisco, for example, already has some of these things going on. So does New York. And I expect that there are some places that are going to say, our area is so desirable, we're going to make a fortune and we want more people here. Now, the tax base, I think, is going to collapse because I think when you turn, I'm just going to use this as an example. When you use a single family home right now that's paying property taxes and you turn it into 4 dwellings, you can say there's going to be a net result. But the problem is people aren't going to want to live there. And if they're not going to live there, that means these spaces may go unused or unsold or unrented. And therefore, the tax base will necessarily collapse. Those locations will attempt to mandate other locations to adopt these policies because they're fair and they're serving a greater good. But the thing is, you can't make people lose money. You can't make people go to a place that has more crime. a place that they consider riskier. You can say the policies are going to make that, but it's not true. They'll fail spectacularly, even though the media and the elites see it as the future. So as this becomes more known, you're going to see all kinds of news stories that are going to just love it. Reporters are going to think, this is great. I don't have to drive so far to work. I can be right in the urban areas. Now, remember, the progressives are the ones who love the urban areas. However, everybody else says they don't like them. And as long as alternatives exist, I see it's going to fall on its face. So I'm just saying I wouldn't invest in it, but it's a thing. The higher costs will make it obviously impractical. Now, remember, in California, they're not allowing new housing to go up in many, many places. They've made building materials very expensive, that the labor used in construction trades is becoming really onerous, and therefore higher costs to build is going on, but higher costs are going to make it impractical to do this kind of thing. Doctors are ultimately going to hate it. I don't believe that a higher density population is really going to be what most doctors themselves want to live in. So they're not going to want to live in those neighborhoods. But I also think it on the outside, it looks like it is going to help practices, but I think, in fact, it won't, because it's going to be reshuffling the population and not in a good way. Now, let me keep going. Here are a few observations. Demographics are a manifestation of popular will. People do things. They move places, they have kids, they don't have kids, whatever, based on their own will and their own reasoning. They don't do it because of the government. Top-down regulations don't work, at least not for long. And this is, in essence, a top-down regulation. Now, by the way, I don't believe anybody did any market research on this. If they had, they'd realize how vehemently unpopular it's going to be. But I don't know, maybe they think they did market research, but I don't think they did. I think they thought, I've got a really good idea. Let's make everybody do it, which is kind of how progressives manage government. The freedom of choice is a serious market force. In other words, people want to go where they want to go. Why, after the pandemic, have people moved to single-family dwellings? And those states that have a lot of it, well, it's because they don't want to be living in a certain condition. And that essentially is why. Politicians often forget their source of power. They forgot who elected them and why they got elected. Now, person that I want you to look up, Google, is Nicolae Ceausescu. He was the socialist leader in Romania. And for decades, he ruled with an iron fist. And he told everybody that they had to have children, for example. He actually made it a crime not to have a child. Well, how popular was that? Orphanages were filled with children who were uncared for, and it became a sociological disaster. But Nicolae Ceausescu met a bitter end as he rather misread the mandate of the population. And I think this might be somewhat similar, even though I hope that Gavin Newsom will not meet such a bloody end. What is the tipping point going to be? And here's the point. There is going to be a side in which the popular opinion says, we're not going to take it, we're going to do it. And I think that's a case here. So we've got progressives who believe that if they just will increase how much we pay in taxes, which after all don't cost anything because they're paid for with higher taxes, come on, more debt, it's only a good thing. They seem to misunderstand human nature. And I think that's going to be the case here. Now, I'm bringing all these things up because it's in the news and it's important for you to know. Different locations have different mandates on where they go. I track those very carefully at drdemographics.com. So as I mentioned before, I know the places in the United States where they are building a lot of homes, single-family dwellings, and people are moving there like crazy. Now, yes, they are costing more and more to go to these locations. The price, for example, just in my place in Utah, the property values have increased dramatically. Nevertheless, the availability of housing is still making a large number of people think, I got to get out of California and I want to move to Utah. The same is true of Idaho and Arizona, Iowa, Texas, Florida, places that people are considering I have more freedom and more opportunities to live the kind of life I want to have. Now, I don't necessarily think I have all the answers, but I can tell you what the indications are for changes. So if we can help you figure out where to go, how good or bad an area might be, the risks you might be undertaking, comparing sites to say, is option A or option B, or is there an option C that might be better? Give us a call. That's our job, is to help you make those decisions. We try to keep our prices low, even though I know everybody believes doctors have a huge amount of money. But the people who are younger, who are trying to get established and are trying to figure out how to make a rational career, will use these services. So give me a call at 833-424-6222, or better yet, visit us at doctordemographics.com. And thanks so much for watching.